This video is a deep dive analysis that covers everything that released during the year of the final shape, and comes from a person who has never fallen out of love for Destiny, and most likely never will. I have played every expansion and season's worth of content since 2014. There is not one mission or activity that I have not personally laid eyes on. Even after thousands of hours of game time, I have no desire to get off this crazy ride anytime soon. I wanted to make this video because there hasn't been any recent analytical Destiny video content that shares my perspective or interfaces with all components of the game, so I might as well make it myself. Let's start right where the year began, at the portal leading into the Traveler. The campaign is the heart of any Destiny expansion, and ever since the Witch Queen's debut of the Legendary campaign, their gameplay quality has astronomically improved. Say what you will about Lightfall's unpolished story, but I will defend the gameplay part of it. It is still the only campaign I enjoyed playing through the missions on all three characters because they were snappy and action-packed. Thankfully, Final Shape's campaign is back to having a compelling narrative like Witch Queen, while keeping gameplay almost as tight as Lightfall. There's a bit of slack in the beginning, but I overall was satisfied with how this campaign plays and ties up the character arcs of Crow, Zavala, and the Witness. I was also shocked with how tasteful our reacquaintance with Cayde was handled. Originally, I was one of many who were skeptical about how his unceremonious return would be handled, both in how he returned and how the character would be written. With how poorly the Red War writers handled him, turning him into an insufferable quit machine, I didn't have high hopes. A lot of his iconic Taken King lines were moments when he was being serious. Any humor that developed from these moments came from the demeanor of Nathan Fillion's line delivery.
Eris, get your rock off my map.
A wave of relief washed over me during Cayde's monologue at the beginning of the Final Shape's second mission.
I ever tell you about the Hunter Vanguard before me? His name is Andal Brask. He was my mentor. Great shot. Terrible gambler. Still, we had this friendly little wager about what was inside the Traveler. I told him there's nothing. So of course Andal says, well then I'm betting on everything. Everything. Lucky guess.
This speech perfectly matches the dialogue that made him special as the original fan favorite of Destiny's character roster, and it reminded me that I do care about his character and enjoy their presence a lot. Also, his return being the strings attached to Crow's wish with Riven from the prior season felt like the best way to handle the idea of bringing Cayde back. The explanation felt plausible in universe without feeling like a heavy stretch, while also adding more weight of significance to Lightfall's seasons. Something I wanted to do for fun during this review is create a VIP list for the VAs whose performances strongly resonated with me during the Final Shapes year, because voice acting is something I think is really cool, and I feel like it never goes as appreciated as it should be. Since Nathan Fillion was just so enjoyable to listen to throughout this experience, he will be the first addition to that list. Shifting over to Crow, his arc is arguably the most involved arc any character has in this series. Crow's arc has been hit or miss for some, but I've overall been a fan of his journey for one main reason, which is that his conflict can only happen in Destiny. He had to go through this struggle of being reborn with no memories in the body of the most hated individual in the solar system, and gain acceptance one group of people at a time. First it was us in Season of the Hunt, then it was the Vanguard, then the Awoken, and finally he had to come to those terms with that person himself after Savathun gave him back those memories of Uldren. From Haunted, most people active with the story knew this man taking the mantle of Hunter Vanguard was inevitable, but we didn't know how exactly it would go down. Having Cayde mentor Crow and bond as allies over the course of the campaign really made the conclusion to this arc feel natural. This line from Cayde during the Still Hunt exotic mission really stood out to me because it perfectly embodies his character and what the Vanguard meant to him.
Those things weren't normal Screebs. They were dripping with the Witness's corruption.
Essence of Screeb. Screeb Musk. Ode to Screeb, if you will.
I will not.
Hey, one of the perks of being in the Vanguard is getting to come up with the names.
This is serious.
Which is exactly why it needs a stupid name. It helps keep it light.
You can feel that line also resonated with Crow during the comment he makes in the final cutscene.
Tell them Cayde wouldn't let a little work get in the way of having a good time.
The only problem with this arc is that no one can currently experience it in its totality. Crow's arc has been a major piece of seasonal storytelling since Beyond Light, and I'm sure people who only play the core expansions didn't care as much for these moments as I did. And how could they? Loads of narrative content leaves at the end of each year, and while it doesn't affect me much personally, it prevents millions who are interested in trying out or getting back into Destiny to be captivated by its world the same as I am. You need so much context from unplayable moments to be invested, and it's the number one reason why I don't recommend this game to anyone, even though I love it a lot. Moving over to Zavala, he didn't have much character prior to Beyond Light outside of being stoic and devoted to the Traveler. That shifted when we got to learn the burdens that this man carries with him on a day-to-day basis. The guilt he felt for the death of his family and the uncertainty that his devotion to the Traveler is enough, which constantly got challenged as the saga reached closer to its conclusion. I saw some reductive statements that the fourth mission of this campaign was just a retread of Zavala's arc during Season of the Haunted, and I could not disagree more. The whole point of absolving Zavala of his greatest fear doesn't mean that he's never going to be afraid again. It means that he has a new greatest fear. Zavala's new greatest fear is that he regrets putting so much faith into a being that most likely doesn't care for him or the people he works so hard to protect. Mission 4 shows the Witness failing at sowing doubt in Zavala through his dead family and needs to shift tactics to exploit his shaky faith in the Traveler instead. This fear ends up costing Zavala his ghost. However, the practice in managing grief he gained during Season of the Haunted is why I think he was able to quickly bounce back. Him wielding stasis in the cutscene before Excision was a beautiful way to show that he's able to break free from his troubled past and adapt to continue protecting the people he cares about no matter what. The only character that really wasn't doing it for me was Ikora. Ikora is still a character that feels stuck in those before times. You know, when there wasn't time to explain why there wasn't time to explain. I know what makes Zavala tick and get out of bed, but I can't say the same about Ikora. The third mission has the least amount of substance in its writing, and that's because Ikora is the focus. I think a major problem with her character is that she has no one to foil off of. A big reason Zavala has gained character complexity in recent years is because of Keitel. Their bond as commanders, and maybe something more, has grown over the course of certain past seasons, and you feel the strong connection they've formed during the post-campaign activities.
I failed them. My family. Like I failed Taj.
No. Steel your mind against these old wounds. We are so much more than the scars of our failures, Zavala.
Did Eris tell you that?
No, small man. You did.
Ikora being bottled up is a point brought up in the campaign, but alluding to that felt the writers admitting that they have her in the campaign since she's the Warlock Vanguard, but they don't really know what to do with her. The only active character she somewhat has an interesting relationship with I can think of is Osiris, and believe me, when I get to the Echo stuff, we will talk about Osiris. She needs more to work with, and I hope her character gets bolstered sooner rather than later. Finally, we have the Witness, our central antagonist. A bizarre character even for Destiny standards. When they were revealed at the end of the Witch Queen campaign, I was confused by the design, but intrigued at who they were and wanted to learn more. Despite Lightfall's story suffering from being too cramped with ideas and suffocating itself, I enjoyed those far too few cutscenes between Callus and the Witness. The best part of this character is without a doubt Brett Dalton's performance. The way he shifts his voice seamlessly between a calm, collected demeanor and a bitter rage is very impressive to me.
Join us. Not as part of the final shape, but as a god.
Taj was right.
Silence, you insolent speck.
He also maintains having power in his voice the whole way through, and makes sure the Witness feels like someone that isn't to be taken lightly. On top of that, the audio effects put on his voice help further portray the Witness as an entity that is simultaneously one whole being and a collective of bickering consciousnesses. I strongly enjoyed listening to all of the Witness's dialogue, and Brett is joining Nathan on my Final Shape voice actor VIP list. Beyond the incredible voice performance, the greater story threads involving the Witness all landed for me. Arguably, the campaign's biggest story reveal was the origin and purpose of the veiled statues we've seen for years. They're dissenting voices within the Witness and show that it isn't as well made as it wants us to think. A group of individuals that combine their consciousness in effort to control the game and try to silence anyone within the group who speaks against them? I've never heard of that before. The dissenters must not be a fan of weapon crafting. What made this reveal work for me is that I felt like I should have picked up on that reveal earlier because the logic was there the whole time with how the darkness connects through us psychologically. To me, having the logic to piece together the answer before the reveal is good storytelling that respects the audience. I know for some, the Witness becoming the stand-in for the darkness from way back when requires some suspension of disbelief they don't want to give, but it worked for me. I think why I could accept this change with open arms is because how well the designers nailed the Witness's sense of scale. I talked before how Brett Dalton's voice helps with this, but it isn't the only factor at play. The Witness has the most complex sequence of events to take down out of any boss in Destiny's history. It takes a campaign mission that's pretty tough on Legendary, a raid, and a 12-man mission to defeat this guy. You can tell so much effort was put into these sequences to make each part of taking down the Witness distinct and meaningful. So the performance and ideology of the Witness is perfect to me, but what about that character design? That's a little more complicated. Since that Witch Queen reveal, the design has grown on me. The smoke effect coming from its head as the faces of those that formed it goes insanely hard. I also like its outfit. Wearing the darkness as a robe really displays its mastery over it. The only part of the physical design I don't like is its face, and more specifically its nose. I know the unibrow looks dumb to some people, but it's fine. I have no strong opinions. But that nose, it's just too cute. It looks slightly better on the in-game model, and I can't really explain why, but in the CGI cutscenes, it's so off-putting. It kind of has this shiny anime vibe to it that just doesn't really fit Destiny. I will give the character designer or team of designers who made the Witness one thing. It has a distinct look and presence. Outside of these missions and their story, the campaign contains the debut of our 6th subclass, Prismatic. Now, it's well known that Beyond Light and Lightfall got their narratives kneecapped pretty hard by spending their runtime teaching us the new mechanics Stasis and Strand offered at a painfully slow rate. You couldn't even equip the subclass until after the campaign's completion. Thankfully, the Final Shapes campaign doesn't suffer from this issue. Getting a base kit right out the gate and getting the new pieces from encounter chests during the missions kept the momentum very strong. No more tutorial sections that drag the pace to a screeching halt. I would like to think our feedback from those previous campaigns was the main driver for this decision. However, Prismatic doesn't need to teach much new outside of the Transcendence bar, since the subclass is an amalgamation of pieces of the other 5 subclasses. I bring this up because if we do get a 3rd Darkness subclass, I'm still concerned Bungie will go back to the old way, since they'll feel the need to teach the new abilities and verbs in isolation before giving us the whole subclass again. I hope that won't be the case because unlocking Prismatic was infinitely more enjoyable than Stasis and Strand. I also enjoy that the fragments only needed to be unlocked once per account instead of per character, and they were in chests that had unique puzzles or were tucked away as secrets. Much more engaging and memorable than grinding Glimmer or some other random resource to purchase them from a static vendor. I know there are people who haven't touched the other subclasses for the entire year, but I found myself dropping Prismatic almost completely by about Revenant outside of Consecration spam. Once the novelty of combining certain elements wore off, I found it nicer to go back to the mono subclasses. I could have Devour on Void Hunter, Spark of Beacons on Arc, and Ember of Benevolence on Solar again. There are some builds that are straight superior on Prismatic though, like Combination Blow or any Devour based builds on Warlock, but that's kind of the issue I have with Prismatic. It does a better job modifying old builds than it does making new novel builds that you couldn't do before. The only novel one that really stood out was the Getaway Artist build for Warlocks. Titans suffer from this the most. Their aspects outside of Consecration Knockout don't mix at all. They're too specialized for any major synergy. Into the Fray would have been a much better Strand aspect pick for general mixing, but one designer probably needed every barricade effect together for the memes, which is now irrelevant due to Storm's Keep. Hope that was a worthwhile design decision. On top of Prismatic, there were a few new light supers and aspects. Twilight Arsenal and Song of Flame are very fun supers that found their niches in the sandbox at all levels of play quite nicely. Storm's Edge is fun, but I really don't know what the design goal for this super was. It exists in that same limbo as Spectral Blades, where it feels like its only purpose is to terrorize PvP until it gets nerfed. Just like with Prismatic, I enjoyed how straightforward their acquisition was. Earning the supers at the spot we originally resurrected at was a nice touch. As for the aspects, Unbreakable is respectable on Pure Void, but on Prismatic feels lackluster because it has little synergy with the rest of the kit, which I mentioned earlier. On Hunter, Ascension is just fun to use anywhere. Pairing it with Gifted Conviction feels so good and started off as a sleeper pick that I was repping from the get-go, which gained more popularity throughout the year. I enjoy how Ascension can be used to cut your momentum for repositioning. I used it for most GMs during Echoes and had great success with it. Last but not least, there's Hellion. While Hellion is simple, it's very effective at clearing out trash mobs. However, it also highlights an issue I have with some of the subclass aspect design. Ideally, aspects should have synergy with every other aspect for maximum customization depth, and Solar Warlock is the worst offender when it comes to reaching this goal. The only strong synergies are pairing Hellion with Touch of Flame and Icarus Dash with Heat Rises. This is a stark contrast from Strand Titan, where strong links between every aspect are apparent. The last thing that really stands out with this campaign is the addition of the Dread. The Dread don't work the same way as the previous 6 factions. Instead of being an independent group of combatants, they are sprinkled into the familiar factions to add an extra layer of complexity or fill in roles that would have been previously lacking. For example, Cabal don't have a high value target like a Wyvern or Brig, so Subjugators and Tormentors slot in perfectly. Salvation's Edge shows us off the best. Each encounter of the raid has a different core faction with a couple of Dread units accompanying them. The addition of the Dread did an excellent job making the encounters throughout the expansion feel distinct from what came before, and they fit right at home with the rest of Destiny's enemy roster. After the campaign, there's usually something to do in the new patrol zone. Now, patrol destinations have always been the content of an expansion I've cared the least about because they're boring more often than not. Now, I was one of the sickos that like Neomuna having tankier enemies because I prefer when my opposition can actually put up a fight, so when I heard that the Pale Heart was reverting the power deficit, I was a bit disheartened. Despite how legendary Witch Queen's legendary campaign was, the Throne World Patrol was lacking in stimulating elements to sink your teeth into. Therefore, I was expecting Patrol to return to its usual lame self. Thankfully, my assumptions were wrong. While it doesn't have the engaging difficulty of Neomuna, the Pale Heart is densely packed with secrets, scavenger hunts, engaging combat, and solid rewards. There's little to no wasted space, which many patrol destinations often have. This tight engineering makes me hold the Pale Heart in high regards as a destination to the likeness of the Dreaming City in Dreadnought. There's always something going on, and that something is usually worth your time. One notable change to other destinations is that the Pale Heart doesn't seamlessly load you in with other players outside of your fire team. I know not everyone was a fan of this decision, but as a more reclusive person myself, I enjoyed having all this space to, well, myself. The core of replayability within the Pale Heart comes from Overthrow. Throughout the year, if I needed a combat zone to reacquaint myself with Destiny after a few weeks break, or wanted to wind down my Destiny session with something more mindless but still have high action, Overthrow became my de facto activity to run due to its high enemy density and varied objectives. On top of just being fun to play, the constant stream of red borders and ergo sum rolls made every Overthrow run early within the expansion's year that much more exciting to play. I'll talk more about the exotic class items later, but I will say that their acquisition changes in Revenant continue to entice me back into Overthrow throughout the rest of the expansion year. The only gripe I found myself having with Overthrow was how tedious the impasse felt compared to the other 2 locations. The main culprit for this was that I felt like picking up all those darkness shards to remove the boss's shield got old really quick. In fact, the single criticism for the gameplay of this expansion I have is that the immunity shields felt overtuned. I know historically there are players that hate any form of immunity shields, but I've never had a problem with them in strikes because the combat pacing of mechanics and ad killing usually flows nicely. The problem with Pale Heart bosses is that they appear much more frequently, and the process to remove them is often more of a hassle than most bosses found elsewhere in the game, which led to combat pacing with Overthrow bosses feeling sluggish after long sessions. On top of Overthrow, there are loads of secrets that range from quick puzzles to mini missions called Sis, which are very similar to the Dreaming City's Ascendant challenges. These sporadic, bite-sized gameplay segments kept the Pale Heart feeling rich with content for a few weeks of play for me. It reminded me of collecting Power Moons in Super Mario Odyssey. Anywhere had the possibility of containing something interesting, and I did something I haven't done in Destiny in ages, wandering. Not knowing what you're going to find is a rare commodity in modern Destiny, so I made sure to savor every moment of it. Finding prismatic fragments, motes of light for Kvostov, and clearing the Sis on my own terms of exploration, instead of following an in-game checklist or out-of-game guide, was immensely satisfying. It felt like there was always another layer to the Pale Heart, and there usually was. After all, it wouldn't be Destiny if there wasn't one secret grander than the rest. Dual Destiny was a surprise I didn't see coming. It's the first duo mission Bungie has ever made for Destiny, and Dethroned Zero Hour is my favorite exotic mission. The requirement of 2 Guardians to enter ruffled a few feathers. There was quite a bit of complaining online about the experience and its reward being unsoloable. I found these complaints pathetic, and it warmed my icy heart to see them fought against pretty hard, which usually isn't the case when it comes to these types of outcries. What those people don't get is that you can't just have a solo version of Dual Destiny. It's like asking Joseph Fares to have his team at Hazelight make a single-player version of their games. Co-op is baked deeply into the level design, and Dual Destiny plays fundamentally different from anything ever made for Destiny. Every room requires communication between both participants to clear each encounter, and there's a timer that keeps a fire lit beneath the both of you, so that way victory is just that much sweeter. I ran this mission multiple times across with a few different friends, and I always had a blast. The mechanics are tight, each section builds on the last while adding its own unique spin, which accumulates into a hectic boss fight. Finally, there's a cute little PvP option after the fight, which puts a nice bow on everything. On the initial run, I was blown away with the mission's large scale. It just kept going when I thought the mission would be over. There's also so much room for optimization, so that you can shave off a lot of time as you get better, which means repeat runs can be at least twice as fast. To me, all those aspects are perfect level design. Now, you can't talk about Dual Destiny without also talking about its reward, the exotic class items. The exotic class items are a critical piece of gear that ties in with Prismatic. It mixes 2 watered-down versions of existing exotic perks that can even come from the other classes, which only activate if you're on Prismatic. I have the same complaint about the exotic perk selection as I do with the Prismatic aspects. I wish exotic perks were chosen to be more general, rather than fitting some arbitrary checklist. For example, every class apparently had to have their Lightfall Strand exotic as an option. This is fine for hunters because Woven Mail and Grenades is a passive buff, but Spirit of the Swarmers and Abiant Leap are pretty worthless. The importance that exotic class items have on Prismatic build crafting was a major stir for the drama I mentioned earlier. If there was an in-game LFG and text chat, then I would be more understanding to those that struggle to form a group, but since those tools are available, the only thing stopping you from playing this mission is you. Unfortunately, class items launch with a stingy earn rate. Outside of repeated Dual Destiny clears, you could earn them from opening any chest within the Pale Heart at a low drop rate. This made grinding for class items a tedious slog. I was thankfully super lucky and got both Syntheseps Caliban and Liar's Caliban for my hunter within the first 5 drops. Replaying Dual Destiny over and over again will make someone resent this otherwise fantastic mission, so I made sure not to do that. Changes were announced soon, but didn't get implemented until the following season. Those changes, such as perk focusing, increasing the overthrow drop rate, and adding them to more vendors like Zur and Eva, made earning them much more palatable. I enjoyed chasing class items for my Titan and Warlock during Revenant. The only feedback I have would be to have Ghost sell rolls for about 30 Paleheart engrams. That way there's a use for Paleheart engrams after acquiring all the destination's red borders. From a 2-man activity to a 12-man activity, there's Excision. While this is technically part of the campaign as its 8th mission, the mission is unique enough where I thought it deserves its own section as an independent activity. Storming up that hill to capture the territory blocking the Witness felt like a better virtual reenactment of D-Day than any actual World War II game. Having companions and powerful relics transmatted in to help you made the journey up to this point something I was proud to be a part of. It also made you feel like you were a part of something larger than yourself, which usually Destiny campaigns feel like you're the only one running the show, so this change of pace was appreciated. The normal version of Excision was fulfilling, despite the lack of any fail state, unless you got error-coded. The Grandmaster version for the Ergo Sum Catalyst felt like the canon experience for the mission. Limited lives and beefier enemies really elevated the stakes of killing the Witness once and for all. I was shocked that this version of the activity was not an additional source of exotic class items. Felt like an obvious choice to me. The main thing Excision and Dual Destiny showed me is I would like to see more of this experimentation with fireteam size and activities. Even though the game was falling apart at the seams, which is honestly thematically appropriate for who we were fighting, I would like to hope that Destiny's first official 12-man activity isn't its last. Last but certainly not least, there's Salvation's Edge, the Final Shapes raid. The best compliment I can give towards Salvation's Edge is that after 10 years of making raids and dungeons, the Rad team has not lost their touch. Raids have continued to impress me since Vault of Glass, and I hold them as the pinnacle of FPS game design across the entire medium. This raid has an impressive sense of scale, solid mechanics that encourage tight team play, and amazing weapons to earn. The only missed opportunity that I personally found is that I think the third encounter should have had a Grim boss that flew around each room and was what you had to fight before proceeding to the next, instead of the Unstoppable champ. Honestly, the fact this expansion didn't have any boss version of a Grim at all was whack. I usually clear a raid about 12 to 20 times before I've had my fill. With Salvation's Edge, I cleared it 6 times and decided I had enough. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy it. Salvation's Edge dials up everything to 11, which makes that first clear experience amazing. The realization that made me feel full wasn't a disastrous LFG experience. In fact, it was the exact opposite. I had an incredible team that got through the encounters with no hard wipes, and the timer at the end said it took us 70 minutes to complete. 70 minutes for one of the smoothest raid runs I've had in recent memory. Most smooth raid runs everywhere else are about half of that. Most LFG runs take about an hour, since a couple of wipes are expected, and since Salvation's Edge takes about twice as long as any other raid, you're looking at the average full LFG run taking at least 2 hours. The culprit for this massive increase in runtime is the platforming sections. They are noticeably longer than any previous raid, and greatly contribute to the raid's behemoth scale. I don't think any raid before makes you feel this small and that you're in over your depth. It was a design trade-off that I think was worth it for being the raid that concludes this saga of Destiny. However, I don't want raids being this big to be the norm from here on out. The other reason that so much extra time is needed for a clear was Verity. Verity has become one of the most infamous encounters in Destiny's history. It takes a little bit of effort to learn, but I had the light bulb moment after some experimenting and using Datto's guide as an extra resource. Running into people who don't want to learn from their mistakes when it comes to passing the shapes was a huge hindrance. However, that's not really a Verity problem, that's more of a humanity problem. As someone who has only LFG'd for this raid, I was not a huge fan of using that website to see my team's armor and ghost. It takes at least 5 minutes for everyone to get their armor situated, so that way everybody's distinct from one another. I can respect the attempt at something new, but needing to coordinate armor is not something I want to do again. Like I said, this raid sits weirdly with me. Its massive scale makes it the most impressive raid Bungie has ever made, and is absolutely worth running through at least once. At the same time, that size makes this raid a tall ask for me to play it as much as the other raids. I know this is a common view because LFG team availability for Salvation's Edge dwindled faster than any other raid. I want to wrap up the core expansion by talking about the system changes. I think every new vendor is now on the modern reputation track system. The most notable ones were to Rahul and Zur. The new changes include Rahul now building up reputation by opening engrams, and Zur taking strange coins for a wider range of inventory. Wait a minute.
Starting from the bottom, we have Emerald Coil and Void Drive for those rare blue quality sparrows.
I guess it's not really a new system, is it? Rather, return the form that took 7 years. Time is a flat circle, after all. An actual new system created was the Pathfinder, which was made to replace bounties. The Pale Heart Pathfinder was brilliant right out the gate. The challenges were straightforward and made earning more rewards while in the Pale Heart seamless. The Pathfinder for the core playlist was a little less brilliant. Strikes, Gambit, and Crucible shared the same tree. Even as someone who didn't mind playing all 3 modes, having to switch constantly ruined the flow of a play session and made me end up ignoring the system. Thankfully, changes were made to simplify challenges and to split each playlist into its own Pathfinder tree. After the changes, I do think Pathfinder is a net positive addition. Overall, the initial expansion launch was nothing short of incredible. I enjoyed almost everything it had to offer, and it kept the fiery passion I have for this game bright for a long while. Hopefully this momentum will be maintained throughout the entire year. Right?
So, how long have you two ladies known each other? What? What did he say?
This year's seasons were essentially an epilogue for the Light and Darkness saga. They tried to tie up some old loose ends while also setting up a few pieces for the next saga. Referred to as episodes in the official marketing, they took the standard seasons regular Destiny players were familiar with, added some more content to them, and split them into a 3-act structure. Despite the shift in delivery, the contents within the acts are the exact same as what came before, so I still refer to them as seasons and will continue to do so throughout the rest of the video. The first season of the year, Echoes, has us reconnect with Failsafe for the first time since 2017 to investigate one of the echoes created by the Witness's death that landed on Nessus. This sets the stage for the first activity of the season, Breach Executable. Breach Executable is another match-made offensive in the same vein as the Menagerie and Sundial. Despite lacking the grandiose scale of those aforementioned examples, only taking place on an altered version of the Tangle on Nessus, I found this to be one of the better ones. One of the key components was having 7 objectives to pull from. Ever since the Menagerie, which had 6 encounters, encounter quantity has always been lacking on these clones. There's usually only 3 encounters to pull from, which always made them feel stuck in the Menagerie's shadow. The other favorable change was having fireteam size reduced from 6 to 3. The salvage activity from Season of the Deep showed me that current enemy density cannot accommodate 6 Guardians of our power. Splash damage is so potent that a single Guardian can lock down multiple spawn locations with ease. Competing for scraps like a pack of starving hyenas is not a fun gameplay experience, so less players meant Breach Executable had a constant stream of enemies for everyone, which left me satisfied with the gameplay of each run. Having this activity set in the Tangle also meant there's a lot less downtime running between encounters. Everything is pretty much stacked on top of each other. The small amount of downtime that's even left provides you with the opportunity to collect samples for a massive amount of bonus loot at the end of the activity, which almost always includes a piece of exotic armor. There's also not an intro encounter like lighting the lamps, which means this time you're straight into the thick of it. So there's an activity with solid game flow and plentiful rewards. It even has matchmaking for its expert difficulty, so what's not to love? Well, besides the baffling modifier combination of air superiority, blast, and void threat that eventually got tuned, this activity suffered from a lack of innovation. In the 5 years that separate the Menagerie and Breach Executable, offensives like these haven't evolved meaningfully at all. Sometimes they have a fun theme that makes them stand out, like with Catch Crash, but their gameplay is near identical. Stand on a plate and dunk a ball are 2 very commonly seen Destiny mechanics, and these activities are the epitome of pushing them past the point of exhaustion. These activities do usually provide a suitable setting to engage with Destiny's wonderful gunplay, but they're designed in a way where innovation feels like a foreign concept. Even though I enjoyed playing this activity, it didn't form any strong memories within me, and I personally would like to see these types of activities retired for at least a few years, since they are a big source of Destiny feeling stagnant. Enigma Protocol was a smaller supplementary activity that accompanied Breach Executable during the first act. As a source to farm the reprise selection of Season of Dawn weapons, Enigma Protocol is a time trial activity, which is still mostly novel for Destiny. This activity cleverly reuses the assets from the Expunge missions in Season of the Splicer, and has Guardians race through them as quickly as possible. There's platforming, Sparrow sections, combat encounters against Vex or Taken, which gives the mission enough variety to feel robust for a few runs. Vex crystals are scattered throughout this race, and can be shattered to add more time. This made the timer feel meaningful to the experience because I felt the pressure of the clock ticking down, but there was also this brief feeling of relief when I added more time. I don't think there wasn't anything wrong with this mode. My only feedback for a future time trial mode is that I think there should have been more elements of randomization, like shifting power-up spawns or variations of encounter order, so each run feels more distinct. More dynamic gameplay always ends up with me playing a mode for longer. The second act provided another set of battlegrounds. Ever since Season of the Chosen, I've been a consistent fan of battlegrounds. They are the square to a strike's rectangle, mostly composed of the same DNA, but trading an element or two that would convince some people into treating them as a different activity entirely. Like with any battleground, they are filled to the brim with enemies and are nearly a non-stop shooting gallery from start to finish. The special aspect about this set of battlegrounds is that they succeed in adding depth to Nessus literally and figuratively. The three of them are built as a singular journey, where the next one starts right where the previous one had just ended. You progressively descend into Nessus' core, entering uncharted territory that had been previously flooded by radiolaria. All the terrain revealed is more varied and detailed than what we've originally seen on this Centaur. The top layer has an abundance of overgrowth. Beneath that, there are large Vex chasms that give the space a great sense of scale, often only seen in raids and dungeons. This compounds into finally reaching the center, where you can peer off in the distance and see the core sprawling in all directions. The action and set pieces have me looking forward to hopefully seeing these show up in the future Grandmaster Nightfall playlist, where combat is experienced to the fullest. Speaking of Grandmaster Nightfalls, as someone who likes to guild their conqueror every season, I always enjoy when there's new content that hits the playlist. This year there was the addition of the Liminality Strike, which was part of the Final Shapes campaign, and another set of two original D2 strikes, Exodus Crash and Verd Spire, which were revamped to meet modern Destiny standards. In the Final Shape VDOC, Liminality was touted as a strike that would challenge seasoned GM veterans such as myself. This claim set expectations that this strike would be reminiscent of the difficulty GMs had before Season of the Haunted's resilience changes. While it ended up not quite reaching those community expectations, the strike was no slouch. The level's terrain was filled with enough oppressive enemies and hazards to match our current power for a satisfying skirmish that wasn't a steamroll, but it never felt like you were on the back foot as much as something like Season 13 Proving Grounds or Season 16 Lightblade. The only thing in any strike today that applies enough pressure to match those times are the Savathûn projections in the Psyops battlegrounds. A small touch I do appreciate with Liminality is that the Nightfall version has more mechanical challenge during the sections where you need to dunk the Taken Eye into the Abkar skulls. As for the revamped strikes, the pacing of both has been improved quite a bit, like replacing the sections in Exodus Crash that required players to pick up those arc pulses and removing all the Cabal cannon launches in Inverted Spire. There is also a lot higher enemy density with more interesting encounter design, like introducing Dustfield Shanks and having the Drake tank be a prominent option instead of a rare secret. Overall, I found the adrenaline shot injected into each of these ancient strikes to increase their appeal to me. I enjoy strikes with more meat on the bone, even if it takes a little longer to clear. The capstone of the season was a new exotic mission, Encore. It was titled by one of the developers on a developer livestream as the biggest exotic mission to date in terms of play space, and they weren't lying. The mission takes place in a sprawling labyrinth housed at Nessus' core. It twists and turns with all sorts of obstacles to overcome, my favorite being the giant laser wall you run away from, Indiana Jones style. The main mechanic involves picking up different colored nodes that change the terrain. It was an interesting concept, but was way too bare bones, since it never evolves past put the blue item in the blue slot. Things spice up a bit in the secret encounters, which are the main highlight of the mission. There's even a fun callback to the Whisper mission to earn a secret emblem. Despite being a decent mission with a big scale, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that will have strongly positive feelings about this mission. That's because this was the only content used to house Act 3's story. You had to play each week with minimal changes between each version, such as a few extra harpies thrown in during the traversal section and 2 cyclops during the Hydra fight. I can only assume there wasn't enough time to add more meaningful changes, but that just makes me wonder why they even bothered with the variant idea. The mission's long runtime doesn't do this repetition any favors. The first run feels adventurous and exciting, but all the following ones are a slog. Also, all the secrets were trickled out throughout the act to maximize the number of times they could entice players to rerun this mission. To top all of this off, there was an epilogue quest after the Act 3 quest, and it is one of the worst instances of padding this game has tried to pull for its story, because it asked you to run the mission again to find radio message collectibles.
We were right there, man!
That being said, the exotic from the mission, Choir of One, became a popular choice as the first special ammo auto rifle, making the mission feel more worth it to experience. Its high damage and respectable ammo reserves make it a force to be reckoned with. In general, there were plenty of standout weapons from the Echoes and Reprise Dawn set, such as Lost Signal, Aberrant Action, and Breachlight, that became regular guns I used throughout the year. Overall, the season had activities that were varied, rewarding, and mostly fun. The only real qualm I had with this season was its pacing, which had a notable detriment to the story. The 3-week start and stop nature of the acts hampered the narrative's cohesion because the story was stretched out over a 15-week period, up when previous seasonal stories took 6 to 8 weeks. The 3-week breaks between acts gave plenty of time to forget story details that happened in the previous act. It also provided enough time for people to lose interest entirely. When I replayed the story for footage, I found myself enjoying it more being able to experience all the acts at once. The biggest improvement was to the Saint and Osiris drama. Act 1 ended with Saint learning he's not the real Saint. This meant for the first 3-week break, we had the hero Osiris being concerned about Saint's well-being, but being too scared to talk to him directly. This drama between them continued through Act 2, until the mini-finale, when Saint reclaims the original Saint's memories. While the resolution sets up a nice foil for Maya and Chioma in Act 3, the meandering it took to get here does not make them look like the power couple they should be. Experiencing the acts in one sitting makes this drama snappier and more believable to their characters. They just had their relationship stressed by Savathun and then reforged it quickly afterwards. It should not take them over a month to work things out. The Maya Chioma half of this time copy drama had more credibility because these characters are less established. She's hunting for her exact copy of Chioma within the Vex net. However, we saw how she valued her personal goals with controlling the Vex over her partner and ended up unknowingly deactivating the real Chioma. While Maya's trying to earn the worst partner to have in Destiny award, she also gave the Vex individuality. This is shown through gameplay by having them retreat when they are at half health. It's only easy to notice with the beefy Minotaurs during Encore, since everything else dies too quickly. The Vex have always floundered narratively because they don't have a face to the name, like all the other races do. Maya's meant to fill that void, becoming the conductor of the Vex. However, stopping Maya's current plans of converting humanity in the Vex to control everyone gets halted in the most anticlimactic fashion, where she gets dinked by Saint's sentinel shield and then slowly drifts off into the radiolaria, still in possession of the Echo of Command. While the A-plot stalled and ended unsatisfyingly, I found the B-plot of the season to be quite enjoyable when Echoes was the current season. After being abandoned for 7 years, Failsafe made a return. I remember not caring much about her character during the Red War, but this season swung me strongly towards her favor. I love that Failsafe's isolation from us was a plot point, and that her other personality was retconned as a voice filter she puts on to sound more polite. She was the lighthearted presence to offset the deep seriousness the rest of the seasonal cast had. Rekindling the relationship between Failsafe and her guardian while performing specimen research kept her as a constant delight to listen to. Uploading her to the helm had me assume she would become a new regular for future seasons. My expectations were destroyed at the season's end when Failsafe gave a heartfelt speech of how much she enjoyed being a part of the team, while being told shortly after that this is most likely our last adventure with her. This compounded with the following season's opening cutscene where the helm gets annihilated. The humor that we rescued Failsafe from a crashed ship to have the new ship she's installed on crash is not lost on me. However, I don't find it amusing. The fact that no one at Bungie didn't make Joy Osmansky sign a contract saying she's recording Failsafe lines until she's 90 is a travesty I'm unsure if I'll ever recover from. At the very least, she'll be immortalized in my list of this year's stellar voice performances. You want to see an average season with an Elixni narrative that gets overhated due to grindy triumphs and weapon crafting drama? You want to see it again? The first thing I want to clarify is that because I think this season is overhated, I do not think it is spectacular or even solid. It's a middling season, but I saw some "this season is a personal attack and worse than Curse of Osiris" takes and just had to roll my eyes. Never forget that 2 tokens in a blue was the time when Destiny was at its lowest. The main thing with Revenant, at least for me, is that I liked most of its ingredients separately, but the way everything was put together in the pot was messy and often broken. Let's start with the crafting drama because it displays the deeper issues Destiny has as a looter. When weapon crafting first launched, it was a hefty and lengthy task to collect all the red borders. "It takes too long to get the guns we want," was the major outcry at the time. During Season of the Plunder, that sentiment was at an all-time high. Bungie devs responded to that feedback, and the red border acquisition process was streamlined immensely around Lightfall. People who were quietly content with how things were started to respond saying that crafted loot is now too easy to earn, and during Revenant there was another course change to remove seasonal weapon crafting to bring back the weapon chase. This has sparked the current debate on crafting versus random drops, which in my opinion is a dumb debate because it doesn't get to the core issue, which is that there's very little that's meaningful to earn at all. This is why my most anticipated feature coming with the next expansion year is Armor 3.0. I have been deleting every single piece of armor that gets plopped in my inventory for 3 years. I'm eagerly looking forward to having armor drops be a relevant part of the game again. As for weapons, the problem is a bit more complicated. Once a new powerful perk combination becomes sought after, it starts to appear on every weapon that can house it. There are only so many heal clip incandescent, repulsor brace destabilizing rounds, and envious arsenal bait and switch weapons that one Guardian needs. It's definitely an improvement from the old outlaw kill clip and feeding frenzy rampage days, but I can't help but desire for more depth and creativity when it comes to weapon perk placement. When I know exactly what will be on every new solar weapon, there's no expectations to shatter and pleasantly surprise. What has been a pleasant surprise are all the new weapon subfamilies that have become the major backbone of new guns being desirable. While they're not as flashy enough to the outside looking in like bows and glaives were, these new subfamilies have been immensely popular within the active Destiny player base. Rocket sidearms have been the poster child for this new evolution of Destiny's sandbox. Heavy burst pulse rifles, area denial grenade launchers, and support auto rifles are fresh weapon types that got me more interested in earning new guns in a long time. This was something that stood out with the Revenant weapons. Unlike Echoes, which had a lot of these new subfamilies, they were mostly side grades of the standard Destiny weapon types we've all known for years. The only notable new perks for me were Jolting Feedback and Envious Arsenal, since they provided strong boosts that nothing in my pre-existing loadouts could do. Vantage Point was the only Revenant weapon that stayed glued to my Guardian's hands. The rest just had nothing substantial to add for me. One statement I saw during this season was that even though the guns weren't interesting to earn, if they were craftable, they would have gone out of their way to get the red borders. Whether the guns are random or craftable, there's an underlying issue that no matter what, the gun isn't worth earning. At least with crafting, there's the illusion of earning something worth your time due to the checklist structure red borders provide. Now, I've never had a problem with deterministic rewards in Destiny. Pinnacle weapons during Forsaken's year were fixed rolls and earned through a quest, but the journey you had to embark to earn them made their addition to your collection very sweet. My main problem with weapon crafting is that getting red borders doesn't have an interesting journey attached to it. Pulling 5 red borders from the seasonal vendor or spoils chest is a lame acquisition process that doesn't provide meaningful interaction with the game. If red borders are to continue, I would hope that earning them becomes more interesting. There's been this odd sentiment of treating random drops in a video game to the same standards as gambling real money at a casino. To me, saying that weapon chasing is gambling is essentially saying that fishing is gambling. Sometimes you reel in a big haul, and other times you don't even get a nibble. That uncertainty of whether you're going to catch something intriguing is fun. However, just like almost anyone else, I do not enjoy being in bad luck hell for a prolonged period of time. What better place to talk about the worst aspects of RNG loot acquisition than to also talk about the dungeon that debuted this season, Vesper's Host. There are 3 criteria I have for judging the enjoyability of a dungeon. How fun is the first run? How fun are the next 10 runs? And how fun are the preceding runs after that? When it comes to that initial blind run, Ghost of the Deep is my favorite just for its spectacle alone, and Vesper's Host is right behind it. The mechanics are a fun twist on the Deepstone crypt mechanics. I also love the bright space station architecture, so any level using it will stand out more favorably to me. Rainix is easily the most mechanically interesting servitor boss ever made. All the servitor copies allowed for some unique splash damage DPS strategies, like using heavy waveframe GLs and Glacial Quake. This also made an issue with Tether greatly increasing the chance of your game crashing, so an eventual patch removed a couple of servitors during the damage phase. Unless you were trying to speed farm, the change didn't affect the enjoyability of the encounter too much. The standout of the entire experience was the damage phase of the final boss. With the constant lightning and clones spawning, this became the most hectic final boss in the game. It was overwhelming at first, but after some practice, there was a unique learning curve that no other boss fight in the game has. Needing to pay attention to your surroundings this attentively is something I would like to see more of. The fun of some dungeons starts to fall off while you're accumulating loot and triumphs over the course of about 10 runs. For me, this includes Grasp of Avarice and Spire of the Watcher. I've noticed that dungeons that have a long traversal section before the first encounter is a key aspect that will make them less desirable for me to play, since I prefer to jump straight into the action. Vesper's Host has a very brief opening, which I appreciate immensely. The Rogue Network quest also really upped the dungeon's enjoyability for me, because I like doing all the puzzles guideless, and it helped make the early set of runs feel just as fun as the first. After about 20 to 30 full runs is when I start to fizzle out no matter the dungeon. I would farm dungeons more, but they have historically been the stingiest with weapon loot drops. You only get 1 drop per encounter, with no way of focusing or adding extra perks. However, this year, 1 chest could be offered a code once per week after you completed the long quest chain. How generous. It also doesn't help that prior to Edge of Fate, all armor drops might as well mean you got nothing after you acquire it the first time for transmog. Getting a dungeon run where you get all armor drops over the past few years has got to be the worst feeling of wasted time this game can give. I personally believe all dungeons need a straightforward attunement system that makes every drop the weapon or armor piece you're attuned to. The loot in dungeons is currently so stingy that players were able to uncover a massive bug that got known as Waitgate. A portion of the Destiny community got together to pool their data and learned that Chill Inhibitor was indeed not dropping with its most desired role, Envious Arsenal Bait and Switch, as frequently as it mathematically should, while other perk combinations were dropping more frequently. This uncovered a massive perk weighing issue that people theorized has been in the game since Forsaken, since some other weapons were cross-referenced from different eras of the game, and a pattern was seen on all of them. The bug was fixed rather quickly due to a dev realizing it required a fix that they created years ago to fix the public event spawning algorithm that prevented the Taken Blight event on IO from appearing as often as it should when the Whisper mission released. To clear up that there was no malice on their end, Bungie gave half a dozen god roll weapons for free at the gunsmith, including the Chill Inhibitor everyone was chasing at the time. This event should have been a wake-up call for players that dungeon loot is not worth spending your valuable time farming, and that Bungie needs to make the dungeon drops more fun and rewarding. Beyond dungeons as a whole having a miserable looting experience, the only major complaint I have about Vesper's Host specifically is the performance, which will be a reoccurring theme throughout this season. Chests only giving one person loot, the Rogue Network quest soft locking, and nuclear cores not spawning were just some of the notable issues that affected players. Despite the dip in technical polish, Vesper's Host is one of my top favorite dungeons. Onslaught was a very well received activity with its debut during Into the Light, and many people voiced that they wanted further development of the mode, so it made sense to see it return during Revenant's first act. Unfortunately, This batch of Onslaught content did not resonate as strongly with many players, me included. One reason I think Onslaught Salvation didn't land as hard was that it was made as a splinter variant of Onslaught instead of being thrown in with the other maps. I would have loved to be able to earn the new gear while playing Onslaught on the old maps as well as the new maps, so that I had more map variety. The other reason is that it didn't fix the pacing issues many people had with the mode. The 50 wave mode takes about an hour, which is more time than most people want to commit into a single activity. It also doesn't help that the normal mode early waves are incredibly boring. I'm in big favor of the idea to condense the current 50 waves down to 30, having the new wave 1 being what is currently wave 21. Also, since our loadouts are static, Onslaught doesn't have much of that dynamic growth over time progression that is the core gameplay of wave defense games like Black Ops Zombies and Bloons Tower Defense. The defenses are the only source of that progression, and they aren't able to do all the heavy lifting. Onslaught is still one of the best recent additions to Destiny, and I still want more of it in the future. If it does return again, then it needs those quality life improvements like vote to skip for the defense setup, and the new maps and rewards need to bolster what came before instead of making variants that make the activity feel fractured. Debuting with Onslaught were a new set of PvE modifiers and the introduction of Banes. These new modifiers were excellent sounding on paper because they greatly changed the way you engage with the activity. In practice, they ruffled some feathers, as they should, but there were two standouts that earned more discussion than the rest: Oscillation and Counterfeit. Starting with Oscillation, I think the misstep with this modifier is complexity. In my opinion, modifiers should be explainable in one succinct sentence or phrase, such as, player radar is disabled, enemy melee damage applies slow, or when defeated, vandals drop a web mine at their feet. Oscillation's description is a full paragraph. Bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Not only this, but I think the more interesting discussion about Oscillation is that most issues stem from where it is placed rather than what the modifier does. In a GM environment, the extra damage that Oscillation provides is so beneficial that it is worth building into, and I don't mind it there. In the standard strike playlist, that damage is unnecessary, and therefore I would argue that the modifier has no place there. Another thing about Oscillation is that I thought the weapons that got the buff would change each season to match the current artifact, but during Heresy, the weapon types were left on Revenant's artifact, which kills the dynamic variable I thought this modifier would originally have. I respect the vision for this one, but I'm fine with Oscillation joining match game and modifier hell. It's asking for a bit too much as a single modifier. Then there's Counterfeit. It adds fake ammo and engrams that explode if you get too close to them. It's something extra you need to pay attention to, but since people want to blitz through content mindlessly, it was nerfed heavily due to outcry. If you want a full rant about how overdramatic the situation was, then I recommend watching Dado's video about the topic. My thoughts align close enough to his, and this is an example that there are times Bungie does need to put their foot down with difficulty. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't like being challenged in some fashion. I love when missions have timers. It lights a fire under your ass for some pressure and asks for minimal mistakes. However, some people don't like the stress and resort to calling timers artificial difficulty. Just remember, if someone blabbers on about artificial difficulty, then that's code for they don't like that specific type of difficulty increase. I'm sure every non-beneficial modifier has at least one person who wants it removed from the game. I have personally been in a decade-long vendetta against Grounded. As for Banes, these are one of the most successful additions to the sandbox ever. They infuse enemies with a unique ability that is designated by the name of the Bane. For example, the Meteor's Bane gives the enemy the ability to spawn a small cluster of homing meteors you can dodge or destroy. Banes spawn on enemies dynamically, so you have to adapt to them in the moment. This is the exact type of change I want to see in Destiny's level design, and hope new Banes are something that become a permanent staple of future content. The next major activity to release during this season was Tomb/Challenge of the Elders. Just like with the Battlegrounds last season, Tomb of Elders didn't have a lot of new loot to go with its release due to how the act structure divides it up. I did about 5 full runs and felt like I had seen everything the activity had to offer. The main highlight of Tomb of the Elders for me was that D. Bradley Baker continues to be the gift that keeps on giving in the world of voice acting with his stacked portfolio of over 700 credited voice performances.
A surprise from your warden.
poison gas.
He's just too good. As for the gameplay, Challenge of the Elders feels like it was a good base to build from, but all of it goes away at the end of the year, so everything here feels wasted. Sure, some of those design principles will carry over into the future, but this game needs a core roguelite activity that gets continuous updates and adds more mechanical depth. The reason activities like this, deep dives, and coil have sparked a positive reaction from people like me is because we are seeing fun gameplay elements, but they need to be housed in a permanent edition instead of all this throwaway seasonal content. The looming shadow of disposability hung heavily over this prison, and it was a presence I couldn't shake off while playing it. Since there wasn't anything important to earn, I chose to use this time to play around with the sandbox changes that came out this season. The big one was a massive uptime buff to roaming supers. They have been receiving pretty substantial buffs over the last few years, such as subclass verb interactions and more orb generation, but none of these have pushed them into the limelight. Since most endgame activities only ask for high single target DPS, roaming supers have been sidelined over burst and support supers for most of Destiny's history. While I have no plans of using these supers on most raid and dungeon bosses even now, I have found myself using supers like Glacial Quake, Arc Staff, and Hammer of Soul much more in expert and above content that's not boss DPS focused. Song of Flame didn't get affected by these buffs, but I still found it very hard to swap off of it to the other options like Nova Warp or Dawnblade, even though they do feel much better. The higher frequency pushed the needle more for me than any previous buff as this change, and makes a noticeable impact to my gameplay. I do think Spectral Blades and Fist of Havoc are unsavable. There's nothing unique they can provide to compete with other similar supers. There were also the improvements to Stasis, which got decoupled from Beyond Light's purchase, so now every Guardian has the subclass by default. Frost Armor was added at the beginning of the year to help give Stasis more survivability. It's practical, but having stacks fade one at a time like ice slowly melting would be a nice spice up to differentiate it from all the other damage reduction sources. Buffs to shatter sources and damage make interacting with stasis crystals more fluid. Shiver Strike not being a joke anymore was also a welcome sight. There were also 3 new stasis-focused exotics released during Revenant. 2 were good, and the other was We Have PhD Flopper at Home. Despite this mostly net positive suite of upgrades, Stasis still suffers from the removal of the Elemental Shards mod. That mod allowed Stasis Shards to power a wide variety of builds, and nothing has been added to replicate that flexibility. Act 3 provides another exotic mission that needs to be played each week for the story with minimal changes throughout. Kel's Fall is in contention with Vox Obscura from Season of the Risen as my least favorite exotic mission. Similarly to that mission, the design feels amateurishly stitched together. The assets are almost completely derived from Forsaken without much of a meaningful spin. The Skorgan was a nice touch though, it really brings the room together. There is this new Void Crystal Mirror dimension, but isn't pushed into any meaningful gameplay opportunities. You mostly go in there to collect motes. The boss fights are uninteresting at best and absolutely infuriating at worst. Why is there no cooldown on the Trickster's teleports? The worst case of low quality in my eyes was meeting the Apothecary. Having the entire conversation take place while staring at a locked door felt insanely cheap, and their inclusion felt unnecessary. We could have just picked up the key item Frido's tonic off the ground, and the mission would have been a little better off for it. Speaking of tonics, these were a new source of target farming to replace standard seasonal crafting, and to say they didn't go over well with the general community would be an understatement. Even as someone who is neutral towards them, I do believe that they missed the mark on almost every front. Between stingy resource drops, strict activation timers, an unintuitive UI, and a plethora of bugs like constant UI freezes and focusing giving wrong rewards, there was not much to love. Eventually improvements and fixes were made, but first impressions are always the most important, and this system was still flawed even after a second go. Just the concept of focusing as a timed buff is something I hope is never repeated. It creates an uncomfortable pressure to optimize farming time. It's also just easy to forget to apply them, especially since there was no system to use them in bulk for extended play sessions. I did like that they allowed for weapon drops to be earned from just killing enemies. Sure, seasonal engrams could be earned at the end of a decent number of activities, but there have always been some edge cases that popped up from time to time that prevented layered farming, which tonics allow for easily. That small roller coaster doesn't even cover creating tonics, which is a whole other story. There would be one new tonic material added to prevent hoarding and incentivize farming the next stack's activity. Tomb Flakes from the prison I can get behind, but Reflective Flakes from Kel's Fall? Exotic missions should not be treated as an activity to be farmed. They're fun to run through once for the exotic and to go back in a couple more times for some secrets, but that's it. Also, you had to go back to the last city every time you wanted to make some more tonics, which killed off any form of convenience. My last bit of criticism towards tonics is more of a nitpick. The basic ether component that came from killing enemies was a physical game object that traveled to the player. I was not a fan of having this constant visual clutter. I value screen readability a lot, so this minor nuisance stuck out like a sore thumb. Ido also had fieldwork for extra supplies each act, and there is no other way to describe these missions other than pathetic. You had to travel to a random area in a patrol space, interact with an alchemy table that did not fit in with the environment, and then get loaded into this small mission where you kill 15 basic enemies in a couple minutes. That's it. There's no challenge or engaging twist, it just exists. There is story dialogue at the end, however, Act 1's dialogue was broken and didn't play with no way to listen to it again after the bug was fixed. I hope to never see anything this low quality in the game ever again. My spinfoil hat theory is that the dialogue here was originally for radio messages, and after the pivot to releasing all the X content at once, they had to be shuffled somewhere, and this was a hastily thrown together solution. Let's wrap up Revenant by talking about how the act structure was handled this time around, and how that made the story play out. After the negative reaction to Echoes' story delivery, Bungie thought editing Revenant real quick before launch to drop all in Acts content day 1 would be a great idea to please the player base. This turned out to be a terrible decision. One is that I'm 99% sure this decision is what caused a large chunk of Revenant's poor technical performance. Editing completed software just before its deployment is a recipe for disaster. 2 is that experiencing the story 1 week on, 5 weeks off felt even worse than 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. Each of these hour or so long segments were trying to cram a ridiculous amount of story into them that made the experience disorienting. Different story beats like Mithrax's curse, breaking Aramis out of prison, and Crow's relationship with Fickrell just kept tripping over each other. Most of Fickrell's dialogue was relegated to Kel's Fall, and he was mostly monologuing or preaching to his scorned underlings. He had no interesting character moments because he barely interacted with anyone else. Any last shred of immersion was broken by the classic seasonal model moment of talking to the vendor at the holoprojector and then needing to talk to the same vendor right after. It's a shame too, because the topics of the season were interesting to me. The Kell of Kells plotline is one of Destiny's oldest, and I felt like it did not get the breathing room it deserved for its conclusion. Thankfully, unlike Echoes, Revenant has a respectable epilogue. Kell's vengeance has Guardians return to the prison to fight Skolas for old time's sake. This unique variant of Tomb of Elders requires you to complete the Warden's challenge, otherwise your team wipes, and it's set to master difficulty. The fight against Skolas has a solid set of mechanics, including the passing around the debuff teamwork needed that the original D1 fight had. It was a fun moment to experience. Skolas does respawn at the end though, since he is now Scorn, and it's safe to assume he will become a prominent figure in future Scorn stories. Despite the fair criticism about the return of long-gone characters, it can feel cheap to have characters plucked from the grave for no important reason other than nostalgia bait. It also devalues our heroics of previously defeating these powerful creatures. I'm never completely against bringing back dead characters, but you have to know how to do it right. Having the Witness return would be an awful idea under any circumstance, but I would like to see a season of Torment that's centered around Nezarec because I think he could use more screen time. Thankfully, the final season of the year knows exactly the right way to resurrect an old character.
Okay, get in.
Prior to this season, I could never tell you what my favorite season of Destiny was because I really didn't have one. I had a group of favorites, Opulence, Chosen, Haunted, and Witch to name a few, but there wasn't one that really rose above the rest. That sentiment has now changed because I can firmly say that Heresy is my favorite season, and really any non-full expansion content Destiny has ever received. Hell, I find it better than about half the full expansions. Heresy has Guardians returning to the Dreadnought fighting against a new strand of Taken called the Dire Taken. When it comes to enemy variants, Destiny does not have that great of a track record. Lucenhive and Siva Fallen provide the most distinct flavor, but everything else like Wrathborn, Precursor Vex, and Revenant Scorn from last season, that I now realize I didn't talk about in the last chapter, don't shift the gameplay meaningfully that much, if at all. The Shadow Legion is the worst offender, which only gave the Cabal a paint job and a backpack. In my opinion, the Dire Taken have claimed the throne as the most notable enemy variant because every enemy got an easily distinguishable change. Some have completely new abilities like Thrall leaving mines on death and Goblins tethering to players with strand damage. Others have their old abilities shifted from another unit, which strongly modify their behavior. Taken Ogres would always shoot from afar with their annoying knockback beam. The Dire versions now rush aggressively with Fire Breath that was originally from the Taken Knights. On top of the modified abilities and behavior, the Dire Taken are accompanied with Eyes of Terror, which kill you if you let them stare at you for too long. Their presence also adds a more ominous tone since we have no idea where these eyes came from or who's looking from the other end. The Dreadnought also got a makeover. The entire surface has been stripped of its wormy flesh, leaving just the bone, allowing for light to shine in places previously unseen. There are also these crystal tendrils jetting out everywhere that do a good job of making an iconic location of Destiny's past feel somewhat foreign. All this space is used to house the major new activity, the Nether. The Nether feels like an amalgamation of every past seasonal activity while also providing some fresh innovation. It's got the boon system from the Quail and Deep Dives. It's got the offensive style progression to complete a few encounters and then have a boss afterwards like the Menagerie. It has escalating difficulty like Onslaught, and using almost all of the Dreadnought provides the opportunity for some free roam spelunking like Shattered Realm and the Haunted Leviathan. On paper, it sounds awful to just mash all these pieces together, but there's a linchpin holding it all together, which is increased resource management. In the Nether, health does not regenerate naturally, and ammo drops from combatants are scarcer, so you have to put a bit more consideration into how you play. Mistakes having more weight made this mode much more engaging. The loot was also significantly more desirable than last season. Psychopomp barely left my Titan's hands, and weapons like Watchful Eye and Abyssal Edge were regularly entering my heavy slot. The Tomb of Want was very reminiscent of the Opulent Chalice, where you slot in runes to get the reward you want, but much more streamlined. It also had the one feature I liked about Tonics, where the drops would build progress from kills anywhere. There was only one drawback to this season's loot chase, which was the addition of Adept seasonal weapons and shiny variants for each. 4 variants of the same gun felt cumbersome to manage, and the drop rate of shiny Adepts specifically was abysmal. As someone who thinks Adepts are overrated, I was satisfied to just get the normal shiny Godroll Psychopomp, especially since shinies could drop from the Tomb of Want. That third shot in the mag is a very noticeable improvement. Having Runneth Over as an extra origin trait that can only drop randomly felt like it could have been a nice compromise for letting the basic versions be craftable. Alas, that wasn't the case, but I didn't really give a damn, and I honestly enjoyed the weapon chase. With every act of the season, the Nether got more stuff added to it. The new encounters made the Nether feel dynamic over the course of this season in a way we haven't seen before. I found myself playing runs well after I had earned all the loot I wanted because I just enjoyed the gameplay flow. There was enough depth here that I found lacking in the other activities like Tomb of Elders and Breach Executable. The Nether does not feel like it was designed to be tossed away. Instead, it's a prominent piece of Destiny that should proudly be cemented into the game's foundation. This is exactly the type of stuff I want to see in today's age of Destiny. The Nether did highlight an issue I have with the Dread. I said in the campaign section that they were excellent at bolstering the ranks of the previously established factions, since they could fill in gaps or add extra challenge. When they're on their own, which was common in some Nether locations, the combat really lacks a baseline. A cast composed of only specialists means there's no simple melody for them to build rhythm off of, so they fall a little flat. Now when the Dread are mixed with the Dire Taken, that's the good stuff where the game's combat is firing on all cylinders. If attempts are going to be made in the future to solely use Dread for an activity, then they need some basic additions to round out what already exists. The other major activity of the season is Court of Blades, which pays tribute to the Court of Oryx, Destiny's original destination-specific public event. The dynamic elements of this activity pleasantly stood out to me since that's what I crave in repeatable gaming content. The mix of augments, runes, and bosses gave Court of Blades more replayability than most other activities. Its short length also had me itching to go back in for just one more run. However, having to queue up with a new fire team on Fireteam Finder for Expert between most runs was the only thing that dampened the experience for me and would be the deciding factor to go play something else. At times, it felt like I was queuing more than I was playing, and Expert mode having matchmaking probably would have helped since that's the difficulty I enjoy playing on, and I didn't want to engage with a more boring combat experience for faster intermissions between runs. Secrets and puzzles were baked deeper into the season than usual, and that became apparent when the exotic mission Derealize was released. Derealize broke the pattern of having the exotic mission released during Act 3, which already made the mission feel more exotic than the last two. Its early drop genuinely excited me because I didn't know what to expect. The prelude puzzle of learning how to teleport and unlock the mission had that classic Destiny vibe to it, and the mission was more focused on traversal than combat, which made for a nice change of pace from the other missions that had multiple boss fights. The exotic weapon reward Barrow Dyad started out middling, but upgrades throughout the season made the weapon much more favorable to many, myself included. The presentation of these upgrades being hid behind quests that were given through less direct means gave the weapon in season more aura of mystery that helped elevate the atmosphere while playing. However, there was the annoyance that certain secrets needed certain areas of the Nether. Since you cannot choose where to land, you could be stuck reloading the activity for a while until you eventually got lucky. This lack of player agency was one of the few blemishes that stood out on an otherwise fantastic season. What left a positive impression on me was I felt more connected with the game this season because the systems felt more intimate to the gameplay. That includes the two taken paths at the shaping slab that acted as the seasonal vendor. It required a lot more attentiveness than most past seasons to get your bearings straight. Each path had its own slew of perks and upgrades that needed to be actively managed to reap the most of them. There were also certain secrets and quests that required a specific path to be taken. I enjoyed needing to put more consideration into how I engage with the season than passively earning rep in the background. One last splash of puzzles was added near the end of the season with the Chestney community event. I respect these avant-garde moments in Destiny's history because they provide a unique flavor of Destiny's world that the standard FPS gameplay cannot. Sometimes I'm not in the mood for gameplay like this, but this community puzzle released right when I was in the middle of my Blueprints playthrough, which had its own chess puzzle, so I guess you could say my headspace was in the perfect zone for this. There's even a page in the notebook I was using for Blueprints that ended up being dedicated for this puzzle. I went on the scavenger hunt for all the pieces, and gave the puzzle my best effort. I eventually submitted to using a guide, but I enjoyed giving this event an honest try for a few hours. Another big part of this season was the sandbox changes that included the release of 3 new aspects and the new bolt charge keyword. Between these additions and the buff to Amplified, Arc feels great to play on, and this season's artifact made it even better for a bit. Storm's Keep on Titan took the game by storm, and continued the class's reign of PvE supremacy. Despite there being clear outliers, this felt the most varied the sandbox has been in a while. I dropped Prismatic pretty hard this season, and jumped around from each monochromatic subclass to reacquaint myself with them. I felt like I had at least one build per subclass that could hold up well in high-octane content. While I don't think there's an entire subclass family that's as down bad as Stasis and Arc were going into this year, there are a few subclass burbs that could use a bit more oomph, mainly Invisibility and Threadlings. On the Prowl really highlights that Invisibility has been in dire need of something for years, and it just keeps getting worse as that passive playstyle continues to grow more and more obsolete each expansion. This mainly affects Hunters as all 4 of their aspects revolve around Invisibility, but it could reach the other classes depending if anything Invisibility related gets added to them in the future. Gear Falcons being the only fun Void Hunter build shows that buffs from breaking Invisibility is probably where most of the fun could come from. Like how Invisibility feeling lacking is most prominent on Hunters, the lack of potency on Threadling sticks out the most on Warlocks since that's what their Strand subclass specializes in. Threadlings at the very least need Thread of Evolution to be their base damage, and then change what Thread of Evolution does. My vote would to have it inherit Horde Shuttle, since that artifact allows for Unravel Threads to evolve into Threadlings. Another big pain point brought up a lot is the lack of melee options most subclasses have. Many are locked to only one, and they aren't always the most fun thing to use. Also, you can't really make fun build crafting choices when there aren't multiple options. The only hat I'll throw in this ring is that the Shatter Slam Elsie does in that Beyond Light cutscene would go hard on Stasis Titan. What better place to see what is and isn't potent to play with than in the second dungeon of the year, Sundered Doctrine, which has its return in the Rolk's Pyramid to stop Dread Forces from uncovering any dangerous tools or weapons. Chiming in during our delve in the Rolk's basement is Savathun, who has consistently maintained herself as one of Destiny's best characters since her in-game debut in Season of the Lost. She is brought to life by veteran talent Deborah Wilson, and she is always a treat to listen to.
Smug piece of creation, aren't you? Looking for birthday gifts from your darling Auntie Savvy? You're a grown killing machine. Earn your own gear.
When it comes to this dungeon, Sundered Doctrine falls into the same camp as Salvation's Edge for me. It's a blast to run through a few times, but there's some design decisions that make me not want to engage with it as much as other dungeons I like, such as Warlord's Ruin and Duality. For starters, the first encounter drags a bit, and I wish the timer that was on Contest was a permanent feature because it adds some much needed tension. Before the second encounter, there's a tutorial that teaches you how the wheels work, and you have to complete the tutorial to open the door. Needing to do this tutorial every run grinds the pace to a screeching halt. Then at the end of the encounter, you have to roll a Shrieker Eye into this hole, which is really tedious and gives me Mario Sunshine PTSD for that Gelato Beach level where you have to escort the watermelon. Then there's another light reflection puzzle, which is fun the first time, but not fun 8 times later. Finally, there's this mechanic where a couple walls need to be shot to open up for a little bit. If you don't deal enough damage, you get squished. Some weapons are incapable of dealing enough damage to open the wall wide enough to cross safely, and I found that to be very frustrating. All these moments compound into me losing interest in playing the dungeon fast. By the time I was done with the quest, I was more than done with Sundered Doctrine. I did find the 2 boss fights, the Zodiac Lock Set and Kiriv, to be very strongly designed encounters. I enjoyed how you could customize the Lock Set's damage window to optimize for burst damage or sustained damage. For Kiriv, the fight felt frantic since there was always something jumping into my line of sight. The route to damage phases was also exponentially faster than other recent final bosses, which felt nice to engage with. I don't know if the theming of burning off the boss's shield across both dungeons this year was intentional, but I thought it was an odd specific detail worth noting. For all of gaming standards, I still think that dungeons are some of the best experiences you can have, and this one is no exception. For those raised dungeon standards, however, this one falls in the middle of the pack for me. While this review is trying to be as thorough as possible, some may have noticed I haven't talked about the holiday events. That's because there's almost nothing to talk about since there's usually nothing meaningful to play. These have consistently been the worst part of Destiny for years now, with this year's Dawning being the worst of the worst since almost nothing worked when it was shipped. Color me surprised when Guardian Games of all events got a huge facelift during Act 2. Earlier I mentioned while talking about Enigma Protocol that time trial activities are a rare commodity in Destiny. Surprisingly, boss rushes are too. So instead of earning score in Nightfalls, Guardian Games 2025 hosts a new timed boss rush mode, Rushdown, that takes about 30 bosses from anywhere in the game's history. The first week of this event was exciting because you didn't know what bosses could and would show up. It had Beyond Light's Empire hunts, nightmares from Shadowkeep and Season of the Haunted, and even Jimmy, aspect of placeholding. I checked in on this event almost every day just because I wanted to. It's rare for me to interact with an event like this since I mostly numb the FOMO, so I often play these very little, if at all. Rushdown's release alongside Act 2 of Heresy was a rare time outside of an expansion launch where I felt like I had a lot of game to play. I felt overwhelmed with things to do, which for me is a positive. On top of this, there was zero downtime between Acts 2 and 3, which helped the story's pacing considerably. Heresy's story reveals more layers of the Hive Pantheon and sword logic that regular Destiny players should be familiar with, while also trying to tease a higher power who also knows how to take. The biggest revelation for the latter was that Oryx did not learn to take from the Witness, like many had speculated. Rather, they both learned independently, and most likely from the same source. We also learn how to manage taking power ourselves, with the guidance of Sloane. Now, her voice actor, Sissy Jones, and Xivu's voice actor, Kimberly Brooks, were both MIA because of the SOG after strike that was going on during the production of the season. The strike's goals involved improving pay and security from AI for VAs in the Union, which I think is noble, so I was completely fine with the muted dialogue for those characters. Even with this hiccup, the story had all-around phenomenal performances, with Todd Haberkorn providing a high bar to start the season off with.
Theris. No. Mundus. It's okay.
I've always been a huge fan of Drifter ever since Forsaken, and I hope he continues to play a pivotal role during the Fate saga, especially since he has history with the Nine. Revealing that Eris succeeded in creating her own throne world after the events of Season of the Witch in the first mission originally felt like Bungie was showing their best hand early, but no one was ready for an old foe with a new voice to steal the show quite as well as they did. The third echo manifested itself into a memory of Oryx that is much younger than when we encountered him in Taken King. Voiced by Joshua David King, young talent who is roughly my age in his mid-20s, gave Oryx such a fresh angle to work from. Impressed that we killed him, he wants to test us to see if we are worthy of becoming his successor. The praise and badass titles made it very easy to grow attached to this inanimate projection of a fallen god, but the other characters weren't as easily impressed. Wary of his true intentions, he was trapped into Eris's throne world, and his two sisters, who have gone through many changes themselves, from how he remembers them, try to bring him back. Their evolved demeanor makes him wary of their true intentions, so there's this long chain of distrust. All these interactions eventually make Oryx realize that his sword logic is deeply flawed, his whole family are a bunch of heretics, and he no longer has a place here. While he reaches this conclusion, we reforge his sword Willbreaker and use it to grant him a second death and destroy the Echo. His final line is raw as hell and is on even footing with Cade's "How's your sister?" send-off.
At least the stars will remember the shape I gave them.
With that, Joshua David King is the final VA to be put on my favorite Destiny voice actors of the year list. Some people were upset that such great voice talent was leaving after one season, but I'm just glad we got to hear their performance at all, and I hope they are part of more future projects across the medium. Ayat. To me, the destruction of the Echo symbolized the death of sword logic. Xivu seems to hold heavy beliefs because of her admiration towards Oryx. She often refers to sword logic as her brother's logic. With the death of sword logic, Xivu now truly has nothing, since we evicted her from her throne world last year. I don't know how her big showdown will be handled in the future, but an enemy who has nothing to lose will be an interesting fight. My only criticism for the finale is that I wish there was a legendary difficulty option. The mission had solid design, but when everything falls over like a sack of potatoes, the gameplay doesn't really match the stakes of the narrative. Overall, the Nether being my favorite seasonal activity, the vibes of all the secrets, and the exceptional story made Heresy my favorite season ever and a good bounce back after Revenant's lackluster experience. The year ended off with a few more events to bridge the gap into Edge of Fate. The first was Heavy Metal, which was a new Briggs vs. Tanks game mode. I thought this mode would be something that I would think was neat for a few matches and bounce right off of, but I ended up really liking it. I played enough matches to finish the event card for the new vehicle, which was about 20 to 25 matches over a few days, and rather than feeling done with the mode, I went right back in to play more. Maybe it's just the power the Sepics and Dust Giants Redux themes have over me, but I found every match to be engaging from start to finish. The moment-to-moment rush of hitting a perfectly led shot, or the tension of racing to a token to heal and get another homing shot to clutch a 2v1 was exhilarating. Definitely the most fun I've had playing a Crucible session since the return of Rift in Season of the Haunted. The 10th Trials rework has no chance to get me into PvP regularly, especially nowadays when the finals exist, but goofy stuff like this will always spark my interest. This event seems like a new regular that will pop up from time to time, so I'd love to see a couple of new maps. That, and apparently the mode is less balanced on PC because the Drake's cannon turns too fast for Briggs to compete as evenly as they can on controller. 2 novel Destiny events back to back, it's a dawning miracle. As for the Griffin's debut, it's a fun novelty, but not a must-have. I just appreciate that new types of vehicles are something that's becoming more common. The other event was Rite of the Nine. Spire of the Watcher, Prophecy, and Ghost of the Deep got their encounters redone in the same fashion as last year's Pantheon event redid certain raid bosses, and their weapons were refurbished with modern perk pools and a 9-themed coat of paint. There were even the shiny holofoils like with Into the Light. The hub area also had attunement for every weapon, which is something I want every dungeon to have by default. The most notable part of the event was something that I didn't even play. Explorer mode was a welcome addition to help usher fresh Guardians into the world of Destiny's dungeons. Endgame PvE has had that old boys club stench for a while, so a feature like this does an excellent job at breaking that culture down and breathing new life in. I can only hope that this mode will also become a permanent component of all dungeons. For veterans such as myself, there was the ultimatum difficulty. The real challenge was getting the gold medal on each encounter, which meant only 1 death across all 3 fireteam members. There could be no weak link. Going into it, I thought Ghost of the Deep would be the definitive challenge to overcome, but to my surprise, the Kel Echo was easily the most challenging encounter for me and the LFG partners that accompanied me across a couple different teams. This one encounter took me about almost as long as every other dungeon encounter in this event combined. Only having 1 shared death between the whole team was the most notable here because I found silly mistakes had a higher outcome, such as this death after being teleported that I thought was complete crap. I also really appreciated the free Eververse items given out in these last 2 weeks. Old Eververse gear really needs to be inserted as rewards more frequently. There are hundreds of items I doubt make a nickel anymore from 5+ years ago. They would probably slot in nicely with the new portal feature coming in Edge of Fate. Overall, this event was a cute mini celebration, but was nothing to write home about, like how Into the Light was. The event was definitely spaced out for too long and should have only been 4 to 5 weeks instead of 10. On paper, there was really nothing wrong with this year's content. There were loads of activities that covered a wide range of styles and difficulties. In practice, the act structure that supported most of the content released after the core expansion caused loads of pacing issues that was a detriment to an otherwise good year of Destiny content. I don't think this stretch of seasons were as strong as Chosen the Lost or Deep to Wish, but I definitely think a good amount of public criticisms get overblown to the point where it gets hard to not want to completely disengage with any external Destiny content, especially as someone who has always, and probably will always, enjoy this game a lot. While the amount of Destiny I played has stayed consistent, the amount of external Destiny content I consume has dropped dramatically. One reason is that I'm tired of the talk about comparing Destiny as an abusive relationship. If you can't help yourself from grinding 400 rolls for your 20th Kinetic Tremors gun that performs almost the same as all your other ones, then I don't know what to tell you. The second reason is that I'm tired of so many people insisting Destiny still needs to be saved. Destiny hasn't needed to be saved since 2018. The final shape wasn't make or break for Destiny, It just had to stick the landing for this saga, and it did so beautifully. I see the same outcry with Edge of Fate, people demanding it to do a million things to reinvigorate their drive to play. Stop bothering with the franchise if this is you. You're never going to be happy with Destiny because it will never be what you want it to be. The third reason is because nuance for discussion has almost completely eroded. To be fair, this isn't just a Destiny issue. This happens to most long-term media fan bases as enough time has passed for people to really get set in their ways. I stopped engaging with the COD Zombies community back in Black Ops 4 for pretty much the same reasons. The tragic second round of layoffs that happened shortly after the Final Shapes launch was the catalyst that put the negativity into overdrive, and I don't think it had wound down at all this year, even after an impressive season like Heresy. All I know is that this game was made for me, and I'm happy I got to be a part of the wild Light and Darkness saga, warts and all. This game has provided me with enough wonderful moments to last a lifetime that extend outside of the game. This December, I'm going to be a groomsman for a friend's wedding who I met a decade ago in Kingsfall. On that note, that's all I got for this review. If you're still listening, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. Check out some of my other projects sometime on the channel if you're still interested. Otherwise, take care of yourself and have a good day. Thanks for watching.